This is Economic Survey 2015-16 Part 2, and the discussion will start with public finance, right? Now we have a lot of information here related with taxation and other sources of government revenue and also the expenditure side. Now, as far as the 2015-16 budget estimate is concerned, it reports that the growth of net tax revenue, gross tax revenue, not net, gross tax revenue, it was expected to be 15.8%. Now in this growth, the share of, or rather growth of indirect taxes was expected to be 19.5% over previous year, and growth of direct taxes, it was expected to be 13.1% over the previous year. As far as the contribution is concerned, contribution to total taxes or gross taxes, you can say. In short, it is called GTR, gross tax revenue. So, according to the economic survey, direct taxes, they will contribute 54% to the total, and the indirect taxes, they will contribute 46% to the total taxes. Now, with this data, we can draw a conclusion that our system is more progressive now as compared to early years. Even up to the period 1991-92, our system was very regressive in the sense that the share of direct taxes, it was only 18%, and that of indirect taxes, it was 82%. Now, direct taxes can be imposed in a progressive manner like our income tax, but indirect taxes, though they are imposed as proportional taxes, but they have a nature to be regressive. And so more share of indirect taxes in our system means a regressive tax system. So now we have moved from a more regressive system to a more progressive system. That is the development. Now another issue is the sources of gross tax revenue. Sometimes the questions are asked on the basis of the ranking of the different taxes. So, as far as the value in lakh rupees, if we see lakh crore rupees, or we can say as the percentage of total. There are two ways to present this. Now, as far as the gross tax revenue, that is the GTR, all these values are for 2015-16. It is expected to be 14.49 lakh crore rupees. But if we see the breakup, the corporate tax out of this will contribute 4.71 crore, and as percentage of the total it will be 32%. So that is number one tax in India now, corporate tax. Number two is income tax. Its contribution is 3.21 lakh crore rupees, and as percentage it is 22% of the total taxes. Then customs duty has a share of 2.08, and the percentage is 14 here. Then the union excise duty that is 2.29. It has a share of 16%. And the last is service tax. Its share is 2.10 or 15%. So even if you don't remember the all the values, at least this is 14.49 lakh, roughly 15 lakh crore rupee. That is our total tax revenue at the union level. And then you can at least rank them. This is the dividing line between direct and indirect taxes. So this is first, this is second, this is third, union excise duty is third, service tax is fourth, and custom is fifth. Now maybe the question is out of these three only, so you can say that maximum is coming from union excise, then second contributor is service tax, and third is obviously the customs duty. Now why the share of customs duty has declined? It is because of the global liberalization, and year after year there is a tendency of decreasing the import duty rates. It may be because of the WTO agreements, it may be because of the various FTAs and CECAs that we have signed. So this is the present structure now. The question is possible on this structure itself. Now next issue is, after this, there is a word I want to discuss that is called tax expenditure. Tax expenditure. Now tax expenditure is the difference between the statutory tax rate and effective tax rate. Now why this is the difference and what is the extent of difference? For example, if we take the case of corporate tax in India, its statutory rate means the rate that is applied is 30%, but the effective rate is about 23%. Now why this difference of 7% here? This difference is because of the various tax exemptions. Right? And this is also, that is why it is also called revenue foregone. So the government may charge 30%, but just to incentivize the sectors or to promote certain things, various type of exemptions and rebates are given to the industries, to the producers, and in the process the tax that they are paying, that is actually less than what they are supposed to pay, and that is why there is a difference between statutory rate and effective rate. And I have given you one example, that is about the corporate tax rate, and many times this is an issue in the Indian tax system, that the tax expenditure percentage wise is quite high. So why can't we reduce the statutory rate itself and give less exemptions, so our tax system will be more realistic, right? That was discussed in this 2016-17 budget also. Finance Minister referred to this. Now, as far as the tax expenditure is concerned, where in which tax it is more or in which tax it is less. So, there is another possible question on the basis of this. So, tax expenditure, tax expenditure as percentage of GDP, if we see, we can also calculate it as percentage of total tax collected. Now, it is highest in customs duty. So, maximum exemptions are in customs duty, and that is about 2.4 to 2.5% of GDP, The next is excise duty, where the exemptions are about 1.4 to 1.5% of GDP. Then is corporate tax. Here it is about 0.5% of GDP, and in income tax it is the minimum, that is between 0.3 to 0.4% of the GDP. So, this is the structure of the tax expenditure in India, and that is why, as far as the reforms are concerned about tax expenditure, so you can say the maximum reforms are required in customs and excise, and both are indirect taxes. So, in other words, we can say that the maximum reforms that are required are in indirect taxes rather than direct taxes, right? Now, as far as the expenditure side of the government is concerned, there are various expenses, planned expenditure and non-planned expenditure. As far as the plan versus non-plan is concerned, plan versus non-plan, the trend in India has been that plan has a share of about 70 to 75% of total expenditure, and the it is just opposite. It is non-plan has a share of 70 to 75%, and the plan expenditure has always been around 25 to 30% of total expenditure. This has been the trend in the past few years. Now, as far as our further breakup is concerned, first we will take the plan expenditure, the plan side of the expenditure. Now, in 2015-16, the maximum money was allocated to transport. So, I am talking about the share in plan expenditure. So, transport had got a share of 33.4%, means 1/3 of the money goes to transport. The second most important sector was energy, and with 28.9% share. The third was social services, that was about 14%. So these are the three most important sectors. For the exam purposes, even if you forget the numbers, don't worry about it. Just rank them first, second and third. So these are the major areas of plan expenditure in India. Transport, then energy, and then social services. Now, as far as the non-plan part is concerned, non-plan 2015-16, the maximum expenditure out of the total, the maximum expenditure of the government is on interest payments, that is 34.8% of the total, more than 1/3. Then the second is subsidies, that is about 18.6% of the total. Then around the same level is defense, that is 18.8% of the total in 2015-16 budget estimate. And then pension is another significant item here. Pension has a share of 6.7%, and grants that center gives to states and union territories, that is again one of the non-plan expenditure. It is also for plan. So grants are of two types, plan for plan purposes and for non-plan purposes. So this is non-plan part of the grant. It has also a share of 8.3%. So this is the structure of our non-plan expenditure. And again here you can focus on the ranking rather than on the numbers. So on the basis of that you can answer which is the largest non-plan expenditure and what comes after that, right? Now in this discussion there is very significant issue that is always there in Indian economy. It is subsidy. Now as far as 2015-16 is concerned, the total subsidy of the center, you know, there are three explicit subsidies, food, fertilizer and petroleum. Now, as far as 2015-16 is concerned, the values were in rupees crore. For food, it was 124419 crore. For fertilizer, it was 72,969 crore rupees. And for petroleum, it was 30,000 crore rupees. Now, if you compare it with 2014-15, in 2015, it was 1,22,676 crore. The fertilizer subsidy was 70,967 crores. Petroleum subsidy was 60,270 crore rupees. Now, if you compare food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy is almost the same. But there is a drastic reduction as far as the petroleum subsidy is concerned. And obviously, because of this, the overall subsidy of the central government has come down. And in 2015-16, the total subsidy estimated to be rupees 2.44 lakh crore, and this is just 1.7% of GDP. It is 1.7% of GDP. Now, 4 years ago, in 2012-13, it was as high as 2.5% of GDP. Now, this decline in subsidy over this period is because of two reasons. One, the contribution of petroleum sector, especially the last year, and also the growth of the GDP, because we are calculating the values as a percentage of GDP. So somehow we were able to manage the subsidies around at the same level, while the GDP grew over time. So the percentage is less, from 2.5 to 1.7. Now, as far as the petroleum subsidy is concerned, you can easily say, you all know about this, that during past 1 year, especially the crude oil prices have come down, and because of this, the subsidy requirement of the petroleum sector has gone down. Another significant feature in our subsidy structure, or the development in our subsidy structure, has been deregulation of diesel, and now the petrol and diesel, they are deregulated. Some credit may be given to rationalization of cooking gas subsidy that was done in past couple of years, introduction of direct benefit transfer in LPG, then surrender of subsidy on the request of the government, that give it up scheme. So there are multiple factors that contributed to reduction of the subsidy in petroleum, and that is a positive development as far as the subsidy burden or subsidy structure in India is concerned. And if I tell you how much is the growth rate of subsidy, just one more thing I should tell you, that if we think about the total subsidy, you see, in the year 2002-03, the total subsidy, it was just only rupees 43,000 crore. But by 2014-15, it was rupees 2,67,000 crore rupees. And then in 2015-16, it has come down to rupees 2.44 lakh crore. So from this trend also you can see that total subsidy increased over 12 years, 2002-03 to 14-15, but last year it came down, and that is what I said is a very positive development in our subsidy structure. Now, another issue here is there is a word in public finance that is called committed expenditure. So it may be asked in the exam, what is committed expenditure? There are two expenses in the government budget which are called committed expenditure. One is called interest payments, and two is called pensions. So There are two committed expenses of the Government of India. So that is a possible question. Now, as far as the deficits are concerned, that I already covered in the budget discussion, the fiscal deficit has come down from 4% last year to 3.9% this year, right? Fiscal deficit numbers, if I tell you, 2014-15, it was 4%. 2015-16, it is expected to achieve the target of 3.9%. For next year in the budget, they talked about 3.5%. Right? But that is not the issue now. What is the source of borrowing? Because if there is a deficit, definitely the government needs to borrow, right? Now, there are two ways to present this case. Number one, when we borrow, the issue is whether the borrowing is from domestic sources or from external sources. So, if we classify the borrowings of the governments into two parts, domestic sources and external sources, means external borrowings, then India is very comfortable, or government is very comfortable in the sense that 98% of the government borrowing is from domestic sources and less than 2% is from external sources. So, as far as the external liability is concerned, it is very little on the budget or on the government. But as far as the domestic sources are concerned, most of the money comes from the borrowing, local borrowing we can say. So, if we further classify the domestic, we can say that market borrowing part of it, that contributes about 82% to roughly 82% you can say, and about 16% comes from other domestic sources. Now, what are these other domestic sources? Other domestic sources means small savings, means post offices, and this is number one. Number two is the provident funds. You know, if people deposit their money in post offices, the government uses that, and when that fund is repaid on maturity, that is obviously by the government and that is with interest. So, that is not called borrowing, but that is called other liabilities or other sources, right? So, this is the structure of the government borrowing. Now, as far as because borrowing is a continuous process in our budgetary system, every year there is fiscal deficit, and for that the government is borrowing. If we think about the total borrowing or total outstanding, because we are paying also, so total outstanding liabilities at the end of March 2015, it was rupees 62.78 lakh crore, and it was 49.6% of GDP of that year. So roughly you can say that the total outstanding liabilities on Government of India is about 50% of GDP. And obviously this 49.6% can be further divided into public debt. Public debt means borrowings. It means borrowings. Borrowings may be internal or external. Internal plus external. Now that contributes 39.2% of GDP. And as far as the other liabilities that I explained just now, other liabilities means post offices, small savings and the provident funds, that contributes about 3% of GDP. So that is the structure of the government borrowing. But what is important to note that this 49.6%, though it seems quite big, quite large, but if the question is on the trend of total outstanding liabilities, we can say with certainty that the liabilities are coming down year after year. And for example, if we talk about the total liabilities in past few years as percentage of GDP, in 2011-12 it was 51.7%, 2012-13 it was 51%, 2013-14 it was 50.3%, 2014-15 it was 49.6%, and 2015-16 budget estimate it was 48.9%. That is expected, not yet clear whether we achieve this target or not. But you can see from all this data that the liabilities on the government have come down over time as a percentage of GDP, right? So that is the end of part 2, and rest we will cover in part 3. Thank you.